On the topic of finding love, I want to talk about the new Netflix series Bridgerton. Set in Regency era London, the series follows debutantes from noble families on their quest to find someone to marry. The show is less concerned with historical accuracy and more concerned with being inclusive, but people have still noticed that there is a lack of dark-skinned characters. Should we be happy that a historical Netflix drama which is popular is including highly melanated people at all? Or does the Bridgerton casting simply highlight colorism issues in television?
Okay, so do I think we should be happy? In short, no. Do I think it highlights issues of colorism? In short, not sure. Okay, first of all, I'm going to be coming from an opinion that may be slightly biased or out of context because I haven't watched Bridgerton or seen Bridgerton, and I don't. Am I saying it right? Bridgerton,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Bridgerton.
Yeah, I haven't seen the show. I will not see the show. So I'm only going over things that I have read and other people have spoken to me about, and threads and think pieces I've seen on Twitter and understood, just kind of get my background on the show. So do I think we should be happy? I hate the idea of we should be happy whenever we see like a black person or something. It's almost like we threw you a bone, like they get like I hate that wording. So for me, no, I don't think we should be happy. Do I think it highlights issues of colorism? I find that tough to say because, as I said, I've not watched the show, so I can't really speak to it. But what in my mind, it's that it feels to me that Hollywood is just doing what they usually do, like putting the black people in either stereotypical, like giving us stereotypical character traits, or their version of black is someone who was lighter skinned with looser curled hairs and things like that. So for me, it's not that it's highlighting it because we already know what's going on, and I don't know if I think, because for me it's a part of a bigger problem. It doesn't just sit with colorism. I feel like colorism is a part, but I feel like colorism is the umbrella in the rainstorm that is racism. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it's a part of it, but there's a lot of other umbrellas up in this rainstorm as to what I think is going on in Bridgerton. I am happy, obviously, to always see black people on screen, on film, acting their butts off and doing a good job. Obviously, I have not seen it, so it's a metaphorical happiness. But I can't personally say that I think it highlights colorism, but I definitely think it reinforces Hollywood's idea of black.
Why aren't you going to watch it?
I'm not the target audience. Sorry, no.
Who's
Listen,
the target audience?
The target audience could be absolutely anyone, but just
But you're not
Anissa.
a period drama person, basically.
No, well, yes and no. I'm not particularly a period drama person, and I'm also not. How do I say this? Shonda Rhimes' writing or her shows, her programming, I am not the target audience for. That is in short.
Okay, is it because of the way it kind of are you talking from like a scandal and how to get away with murder perspective?
And many other things.
Okay, sorry, I'm just very interested in that.
Do you know
Maybe
what
I'm asking too many questions.
No, it's not too many questions, because the thing is, I think Shonda's doing her thing. I recently just watched How to Get Away with Murder. I previously watched Scandal, but then had to let it go. Anyway, I've recently taken it back up, and now I've had to take another break. But I do really like Shonda. I've even read her book, but I even had to stop reading the book. I've just realised I'm not engaged by her writing style, and that is what I will leave it at.
Girl, you know I'm gonna have so many questions when we stop filming. But
So that is
leave that one alone. In terms of Bridgerton, I don't want to say that I was happy by the representation. I was glad about it, not because I'm like, oh, there's black people, but I think the Regency era is an era that we have predominantly not really seen any black people in. Like, one of the big things is Downton Abbey. That's something that has been named several times. And I think it's Julian Fellows who was the creator of that. And he was saying, well, you know, he's not going to lie because there just weren't black people around then, so he can't feature them, which is a lie. Black people have been in this country since the Roman period, like since 12th, 13th century, but he just chose never to feature them apart from some random black guy who was a musician, and that was very stereotypical. So I can see that Bridgerton is trying to be a bit more inclusive, because they said that they're not doing color blind casting. They did color conscious casting because they consciously try to include black people. Now, I definitely think they failed in the representation. I'm not going to lie, because it wasn't even that they were stereotypically black or stereotypical characters. It was just more so there wasn't anything that really made them black. But it made me wonder, does everything need to feature characteristics of someone's black identity when there is a black character? I don't know the answer to that, but I just think Bridgerton has a really long way to go. And I think it's probably going to get there because it's been such a hit. But I just think that it needs to have better representation. We don't just want black people featured. We want to have them, have characteristics or say something or be something more than just a character that could be anybody.
So, sorry, just not to jump in. Are you just saying that, because I'm just trying to understand, that you would want the characters, because I'm presuming the characters are just being the characters, but they're not speaking about their blackness. Do you want the blackness to be a bit more overt? Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to understand.
Do you know what? That's a question I throw out to you ladies, because I don't actually know where I stand on that at the moment. That was one of the criticisms that I saw, and I was just like, well, do we want them to feature it? Because a lot of times when we talk about it in recent years, it's traumatic black experiences. Not so much joyful or just someone being black and happen to be in the Regency era. So I'm not really sure where I stand on that at the moment. They did make one vague reference to blackness in the entire series because I binge watched it over the New Year's. But I just thinking, for me, I didn't think it was a very good series in general. I think people are kind of excited and it's mediocre. But I think I'm happy that in an era where we're not usually represented, that they have tried to, at least.
Guys, I have so much to say.
I bet you do.
When everyone was talking, I was trying to be like, oh, I'll start there. Ooh, you guys have just said so many things. Let me just start at the end, because I kind of feel the opposite way in terms of representation, because like Sophie, you just said that there wasn't anything that really like quote unquote made them black, but I don't feel like that always necessarily has to be the case. When, we talked about this one time when we were talking about Halle Berry almost taking the role of a trans man and then changing her mind after people said, maybe not, babes. And we had that big conversation about representation in the media. And I feel like usually my biggest issues of representation is, let me just speak from a black perspective, because I could say all people of color, but let me just speak from being black. It's like, you don't ever get to see characters. Actually, it's relevant for all marginalized people. You don't actually get to see characters who are dealing with things other than what the thing is that makes them marginalized. So when you see black characters, they're usually dealing with racism. When you see characters with big bodies, they're usually dealing with their weight. They don't just get to be a person looking for love, or a person in a random series that doesn't really have anything to do with their race or their appearance or whatever it is that makes them marginalized. And I feel like that is the thing that aids humanization of marginalized communities, is to show that it's literally not just, we said this in episode 1, it's literally not just one sad road of racism and, all of the bad stuff that we talk about, which is fine to talk about, but I mean, like, it's not our everyday lives. Like, people are human. We do all the human things that everyone else does. But when we turn on the television, the representation doesn't look like that. So I actually appreciated the fact that these characters, they hardly changed. I can't say that because I haven't read the books. They hardly changed anything about the characters from book to screen, apart from their appearance. And like Sophie said, there was a vague reference, but I didn't feel like I needed something else. I didn't feel like it needed to be like, oh, woe is me because I'm a black man and it's 1813. Like, I didn't need that. Like, we're here for a fantasy show. We're here for a fantasy show about romance. Why can't we just be having that? Why can't we just be having balls and someone playing the violin version of Thank You Next? Like, I don't need people to be struggling every single time we turn on the television. It's nice to have representation that is a lot more humanizing than that.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I never actually said I made up my mind on it. So I said, I'm not really sure where I stand on it. And I think I'm saying that's where some of the arguments have come from. I think it was in the Huffington Post or Refinery 24, whatever. They were saying how their thing is like, some people said, why didn't they talk about being black? And like you said, Luanda, I'm like, I'm not really sure where I stand on all of that. Like, for me, I'm like, they could, they couldn't. it's all kind of a mishmash for me, because even though you're saying it is fantasy, which of course most of it is, some of it is based on facts in terms of Queen Charlotte and Mad King George. So there were elements of that, and I think that's why some people have really kicked against it, because they're like, oh, well, some of it's historical. We should just be making, and I'm like, drop me on that, because like you said, if you're going to feature Ariana Grande and you're not protesting, don't say anything about the people being black. It doesn't make sense. But I think in terms of like the colorism debate, I was uncomfortable that most of the main characters who were featured of black descent were mixed raced or looked mixed raced or were light skinned, and the darker skinned black people were literally the extras. And that's where I think that Bridgerton has a way to go. But I guess I kind of thought about it like a lot of Shonda Rhimes things, like Grey's Anatomy that became Private Practice, that became Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, Station 19. Like, you have to start somewhere. So I'm going to give Bridgerton a little bit of rope, hopefully not to hang themselves, and see if later series they use this as a jumping off point to feature a much more diverse cast. Like maybe one of the love interests can be Asian or like from a different part of the world and not just black. So hopefully we'll see more. This is the first one that she's done for Netflix, so I'm hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the colorism, that is something that I definitely noticed, and it kind of frustrated me as well, because it feels like not just with Shonda's things, but in general, like if we were to look towards dark-skinned successful actresses, they're usually over the age of 35. But when we're talking about the young wives or the desirable, you know, debutantes and things like that, they're nearly almost always mixed race, light-skinned black. And so it still says something to do with desirability and femininity when I saw lots of opportunities for there to be dark-skinned black women, and they were either not dark-skinned black, or they were either not black at all, or they were light-skinned black. And so if we're talking about a show which is trying to be intentionally inclusive, why is it that even when we're trying to be intentionally inclusive, there is still the lack of dark-skinned female representation? Because I don't really feel like there was a great, you know, character who was a dark-skinned black man, and then the main black character, he's like a biracial black man. So there was a good mixture, I'd say, for the men. But again, when it comes to the women, there's one dark-skinned black actress, and again, like I said, she's over the age of 35. She's a brilliant actress, and so is the Queen. But that's why I wanted to say, in terms of the difference between, you know, you mentioned, Sophie, the difference between a colourblind casting and a colour-conscious casting, because they were inspired by the fact that many historians believe that Queen Charlotte had African heritage, and they used that as means to be inclusive with the show. And that's not to say that there weren't black and brown people in Regency era London, because there were, but obviously there wouldn't have been that many, and it wouldn't have been casual to have an interracial relationship. But I don't have a problem with the fact that they've made it seem like it would have been in 1813. That's fine, because I'm here for the representation. But like I said, again, it just always feels like no matter how inclusive we get, like dark-skinned black women, especially young ones, are always fallen by the wayside.
But that even to like, I 100% agree with you, Luanda, and I know that we spoke about they were doing like a conscious casting, but I still feel like a lot of their unconscious biases still riddle their way through in the casting, because it's that idea of, or the notion that some people have had, that young, darker skinned women, whether you are black or Asian, whenever you're a darker tone and you're young, that we're not the objects of desire. We just are not seen that way. And I think that's what that probably may have played a part. I can't say for sure, but when they're casting someone and they're thinking, oh, who's going to be a lead designer, they might not think, oh, it's going to be the I think it could be a bit of an unconscious bias there, even though they were trying to cast consciously.
I feel that, and I'm here for more South Asian representation in the show.
Oh, hell yeah. And the darker South Asian ones, please.
Darker South Asian,
yes, please.
There were two South Asian people. Like, I counted two South Asian people that had lines, and both of them, like, they could have been they weren't so like they would have been white passing, but they could have been maybe a biracial black person, maybe a tanned white person. So I'm absolutely here to see like dark-skinned South Asian people be in the desirable, rich, high society roles as well. And they've got time. This woman has written a lot of books, so we have room for lots of series. I'm gonna give them space. There's room.
That's what I'm here for, giving it a bit of space, because it's actually like an 8-part book series, this specific series, because it's based on every child in the family finding someone. So we got like potentially 8 series if it carries on being this popular, which I'm sure it will. But I just wondered, do you think that we're just never pleased? Because that's something I had to ask myself, because when I saw some of the responses that people had, I'm like, guys, if there had been no black people, would have been complaining about that and just said, can't we get some black people? And then we get some black people and we're just like, we're not happy with those black people. Part of me was just like, let's just see where it goes. Like Shonda Rhimes, she's not the person who's not here for diversity. Like we can say a lot about her writing or whatever, but she started off Grey's Anatomy. The main character, they said apart from the main character, everyone else was a colorblind cast, and that was a colorblind casting. Whereas you see with Scandal, once she was able to make that a success, she was able to try and put more people in position. And I think very much because this is the first one, again, like I said, on Netflix, they're just kind of towing the line. And I'm sure that more of the stuff that she brings, because she has a multi-million pounds deal with them, she's going to do much more representation.
I feel like that what you just said, Sophie, just goes back into what Anissa started her statement with, because you're like, oh, well, we're never just going to be happy. And Anissa says, like, you know, I can like this or I can't like this. I shouldn't feel like I should be silenced just because you've essentially thrown us a bone. And for me, it's like, I'm pleased enough with the inclusivity for me to watch all of the episodes of this show, but it doesn't mean that we still can't talk about things that could be improved. And I don't see anything wrong with constructive criticism, because it's like, we're never going to learn if we don't do it that way. I think people being silent is the thing that holds us back from progressing to the point where everyone's included. So there's nothing wrong with having a conversation about, like, actually, I think it's great that they included all of these types of characters, because really they didn't have to. Like, I'm sure this woman, when she wrote the book, she wasn't thinking that the Duke was black, but she's happy for the Duke to be cast as a black man. So that's progression for me. But it's not a destination. It's more like a journey. So we can still talk about what it would look like for us to get to the next step.
You see, I'm a bit on the other side of the fence for that. I agreed what you said, Luanda, but I do think, and I'm not speaking for black people, I'm just talking people at a point, we've got to an age where everyone is super critical about everything, and they're not okay to just let art breathe. Do you know what I mean? Like, they have to have an opinion. They have to be upset about something. I call them the Moni Jonies or the Moody Trudies. Like, they just need to be upset about something. And even when I'm with you, nothing is ever perfect. So something can always improve and get better. But I usually feel like, and I don't know if it's just the way social media and things work, you usually just hear a lot of the negative before you hear the positive. And so for me, it's just like, sometimes you just have to let things breathe a little bit. Does that make sense? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense, girl. It makes sense.